Like, oh my god, did you know that like superheroes are like cops and cops are like totally evil? So superheroes are like evil too. Hell hath no fury like a woman bored. We've seen the far left go after everything from sports teams to syrup, so it was only a matter of time before they came for the superheroes. Now, feminists have been attacking comics for years, and have gotten pretty good traction since the industry went woke back in 2014. But this latest nonsense comes from all the clamoring about Black Lives Matter and people exploiting other people panicking about getting canceled. If you want to ruin an industry, now's the time to do it, because these companies are dropping to their knees faster than crackers at a BLM march. And that's what Time magazine decided to do. Attack superheroes as cops. Quote, "We're re-examining how we portray cops on screen, and now it's time to talk about superheroes." You can just hear it, can't you? You just know this is some try-hard, douchey white woman. What's your name? Eliana Dockerman. Bitch, your name is Karen. Look at her. You even look like a Karen. Well, Miss Karen, who clearly has too much time on her hands, what you got to say? In the past several weeks, as calls to defund the police have gone mainstream, pop culture critics and fans have been reconsidering how Hollywood heroizes cops. Oh, really? This is how you're starting out, by bitching about TV shows and movies showing cops as the good guys. And I'm sure you're going to follow up with how only black people are the villains, and that there's never any discussion of race because obviously Karen hasn't heard of In the Heat of the Night. How many bad cops movies are there? Not just the ones about cops not following rules but still having morals, but literally about villainous officers who get killed or brought to justice. There's so many movies and TV shows like this, I don't even know how people are trying to pretend that every cop show is nothing but propaganda. But we've seen long-running shows like Cops get canceled because now it's wrong to show cops arresting criminals. But that has fuck all to do with superheroes, who aren't cops and generally don't abide by the law, what with being vigilantes. But Karen's not going to let a pesky thing like facts get in her way. Quote, "Superheroes have dominated popular culture in the last decade. They are fixtures of the highest grossing movies and icons to more than just our children. They are beacons of inspiration. Protesters dressed as Spider-Man and Batman have turned up at recent Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And yet, what are superheroes except cops with capes who enact justice with their powers? Vigilantes who break the law and do jobs that cops either can't or won't do? Spider-Man tries to help and then gets hunted by cops and trashed by J. Jonah Jameson. Batman operates completely outside of the law and became Batman in large part because Gotham's police were ridiculously corrupt, incompetent, and ineffectual. The only good cop was the one he worked with, Jim Gordon. If these are the two heroes you're going to use, you picked the wrong ones, Karen. With a few notable exceptions, more on those later, most superhero stories star straight white men. What does their race have to do with them being superheroes? Would you be fine with them not actually being cops if they were minorities? Who either function as an extension of a broken US justice system or as vigilantes without any checks on their powers? So they're not cops. Karen, did you read this after you wrote it? We're only a couple of paragraphs in and you've already dismantled your own argument. If they're not cops, what's the point of your article, besides bitching? Usually, they have some sort of tentative relationship with the government. The Avengers work for the secretive agency S.H.I.E.L.D. Batman takes orders from Gotham Police Commissioner Gordon. Even the villainous members of the Suicide Squad execute government orders in exchange for commuted prison sentences. And even when superheroes function outside of the justice system, they're sometimes idolized by cops because they're able to skirt the law to get the job done. Everything you just said is wrong. Allow me to mansplain. The Avengers operate outside of the government and don't work for S.H.I.E.L.D. in the comics or in the movies. Batman doesn't take orders from anyone, especially not Gordon, who knows that if he ever ordered Batman to do something, Bats would just ignore him. The Suicide Squad does work for commuted sentences, but they're forced to do this against their will by Amanda Waller. And yes, sometimes the cops like superheroes because they can do things the cops can't do. This is how normal people would react to a superhero. Then she goes on to bitch about the Punisher in a single story from 2019 where some cops who like Frank Castle fanboy for a little bit, and Frank basically tells him that he's not like them because they uphold the law and he doesn't. If this is your example, Karen, you really need to dig deeper because this ain't cutting it. Then she says, quote, "The Punisher is a representation of a larger problem in superhero narratives. When Batman ignores orders and goes rogue, there's no oversight committee to assess whether Bruce Wayne's biases influence who he brings to justice and how. Heroes like Iron Man occasionally feel guilt about the casualties they inflict, but ultimately empower themselves again and again to draw those moral lines. Yeah, kinda like vigilantes. And Batman does have an oversight committee. Their names are Dick Grayson, Alfred Pennyworth, and Clark Kent. Those are the people who keep him in check. And again, Batman doesn't take orders. He's already rogue. He does what he wants. This is so basic that even the 60s Batman show got this right. How are you this bad at fact-checking? I'd like to speak to your manager, Karen, especially about your constant fixation on race. Quote, given that the creators and stars of these movies have historically been white men, it's hardly surprising that so few reckon with issues of systemic racism, let alone sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of bigotry embedded in the justice system, or the inherent biases these superheroes might carry with them as they patrol the streets or the universe. What the hell does that have to do with putting on a silly costume and saving people? You've got super strength. You've got super hearing. You can fly. When you shot your first load, you took out the farm silo, and with all your great powers, you shouldn't stop crime or wars or aliens attacking the planet, but instead stop systemic racism. All those things I can do, all those powers, and I couldn't even stop one white man from saying nigger. So then, like every woke white woman, Karen pretends to know about black people shit. She struggles to name black characters because she doesn't know jack about comics or films of black people, and the best she can come up with is Blade, who's totally not a superhero, and tries to use the hospital scene as proof of a commentary on racism. Quote, in one scene, two cops walk in on Blade fighting what is clearly a monstrous vampire and begin shooting at Blade instead. Blade turns around and asks, are you out of your damn mind? It's played as a throwaway moment, but one that rings true decades on. First of all, the correct line is, "The fuck are you out of your damn mind?" Second of all, it's obviously played for laughs that the cops are shooting at the good guy, not a comment on cops shooting at black people. I know it's hard for Wakandans like you, Karen, to understand the concept of context, but at least try. The cops don't know what's going on, and shoot at both Blade and the vampire, but only hit Blade. That's all that happens. The same thing happens in A Dark Knight Rises. It's not racism, it's a joke, but I understand jokes are a foreign concept for Karens. Then she moves on to the Black Panther movie, a film about a racist, xenophobic society that hoards its power and refuses to share it with anyone, especially the white colonizers, who they've ironically allowed to take over the entire continent of Africa, despite having the power to easily stop them. If this is going to be your example of good representation, I don't think Black Tojo versus Black Hitler is a good choice. But of course, that's the argument she makes, that Killmonger, who wants to take power and use Wakandan might to only help black people, was right. Quote, while Killmonger and his father broke laws and enacted violence for their cause, their conviction that people of color have historically lacked the tools to fight systemic oppression was correct. T'Challa eventually comes to represent a compromise between these two viewpoints. He uses his relative privilege to empower people who've been held back by colonialism and racism, but finds non-violent methods to do so. At the end of the movie, T'Challa opens a community center in Killmonger's hometown, Oakland. But not in any of the African nations, literally next to Wakanda. He wants to fight colonialism by going thousands of miles away to the country with the least oppression and fight it there, not help the African nations that were actually colonized. You know, the ones Wakanda ignored for decades upon decades, even though they had the technological advantage over all those evil colonizers. When you say it out loud, it just sounds like stupid racist propaganda. Again, really not a good example, Karen, but the bitching continues. She moves on to the recent Spider-Man game and complains that Spider-Man works with cops, jokingly calling himself Spider-Cop, while completely ignoring that a major plot point in the game is that one of the cops turns out to be crooked and he tries to take this cop down. But then that would have required Karen to read a synopsis of the game, and we all know she's too much of a busybody for that. So she says, quote, Spider-Man has long had a complicated relationship with the NYPD. Last year's Spider-Man game received some pushback over what many critics called propaganda. Where did that happen? I'm serious. I never saw anything like that. What are you talking about? And you do know that Miles Morales was in the game, and his father is, or was, a cop, right? Of course she does. Because she saw Into the Spider-Verse, where she admits that his dad doesn't like Spider-Man because Spider-Man is a vigilante. Karen, you're ruining your own argument left and right. How are you going to come back from this one? A Miles Morales game will arrive soon, with a Spider-Man who's a young man of color in a city with a painful, recent history of stop-and-frisk policies disproportionately inflicting trauma on young black and brown men. It will be a striking oversight if it doesn't. Yeah, what are the chances that a kid who watched his police officer father die in front of him would suddenly hate cops and think they're all against black people? If the writers did that, it would go against everything they showed in the first game. It would make no sense at all. There's no reason Miles would hate or even distrust cops based on anything that happened in the first game. This is a problem with being so woke. Basic common sense evaporates, which is why Karen decides to talk about that shitty Watchmen in name only show from HBO. Just listen to how she describes the comic versus the shit show. Quote, unlike Moore's story, which ultimately becomes a tale of white men fighting over power, Lindelof's show begins with the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Moore and Gibbons' story, get it right, had nothing to do with white men fighting over power. It was all about asking why we should trust people with power and what people with power will do with that power, sometimes for the right reasons and sometimes for the wrong reasons. Race had nothing to do with it. Lindelof, however, just wanted to tell a propaganda story and knew no one would watch it if he just put it out there, so he got a hold of the Watchmen name, slapped it on the show, and told a story wholly unrelated to the real deal. The show was ignored by the audience and completely failed in the ratings, resulting in it being canceled after one season. And that's the problem with so many of these woke TV shows, films, comics, and games. These people are more enamored with the idea of what they're doing than actually doing it well. This is what brought down The Last of Us Part 2. This is why so many comic books, Marvel Comics in particular, are damn near impossible to read. This is what crippled Star Wars, Star Trek, and Doctor Who. The attempt to bring in representation and diversity results in tons of lazy ideas and tragic incompetence. Watchmen failed by every metric, and it failed precisely because, as Karen says, quote, creators can snatch up those familiar characters and weave a new story with new politics and a new perspective using only fragments of what came before. This is like claiming someone who sampled James Brown is a better musician because they mixed it with a bunch of other music. Did they create something different? Yes. Is it necessarily better? No. You didn't play any of those instruments, and you can't. You couldn't recreate any of those sample sounds if you tried your hardest. That's why those original songs are constantly sampled, while yours is only mentioned. One took actual skill and talent to achieve, the other only took the ability to copy and paste. And that's not to say that there aren't great songs that sampled other songs. There are plenty. But even then, there's musical skill and talent behind that, not just someone snatching a cool bass line. That's what Karen is talking about. Snatching cool bass lines and then acting like your lo-fi mumble rap is high art. Hiring a bunch of black people to make woke versions of stories they can never hope to write on their own isn't going to do anything other than show that those people don't have a lick of skill or talent. But it's interesting that Karen dropped her original thesis. This was supposed to be about why superheroes are cops and therefore bad, but it quickly became about race. With every black character she mentioned, she focused on race. She never showed the reason why any of these characters wanted to help people, why they would risk their lives, or why some cops would admire them. All the reasons that make superheroes inspiring and heroic were removed to focus on their melanin count. And that just goes to show why so many black superheroes fail to get over. Because it's never about them being heroes. It's only about them being black. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.